Tenemos una ponencia más. Un aplauso, por favor. Y esta conversación puede seguir después con una cervecita, en fin, que es un poco el espíritu de esta convocatoria. Un placer presentar a Heather Marsh. Ella trabaja y de hecho está siguiendo muy de cerca toda la oleada de revueltas interconectadas desde el 15M, Primavera Árabe, Occupy. También ha sido editora de Wikileaks y tiene algunos libros muy vinculando procesos emergentes, bottom-up, de revueltas interconectadas. Entonces me parece un súper placer y un lujo tenerla acá en Madrid. Y bueno, pues os dejo con ella, que vamos un pelín atrasados. So welcome to Madrid. So feel at home. And okay, it's on you.
Thank you. Hi. I'm not used to these at all. No mic check. Okay, is this the right volume? Yes, at the back? Okay, so I am Heather Marsh. I am a writer and a programmer, and I've worked for many, many years in local activism and mass collaboration and mass communication. From 2010 to 2012, I worked I was the administrator and the editor-in-chief of the WikiLeaks news site, WikiLeaks Central. And there I was trying to create knowledge repositories of the information that we received, tie it to current news, and create action based on that news. Because news without action is just voyeurism, and action without properly audited information leads to a very easily manipulated public. So I was trying to put the two in one place. And in 2012, I moved more onto social media collaboration. And I wrote a first book called Binding Chaos about all the problems that I had seen working with WikiLeaks and Anonymous and Occupy and M15 and all the movements of the few years prior. And we all seem to keep coming up against these same issues regarding consensus and direct democracy and collaboration. And the more I worked on more projects, the more it seemed that we as societies, we had been butting our heads for millennia against these same issues, which really come down to trying to find a balance between personal autonomy, diversity, and society, which is the title of my next book. And along the way, I was thinking about what sort of tools we would need in order to achieve this balance. And the primary one I've been working on is a universal database and trust network called GetG. So today what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the ideas from Binding Chaos and a little bit from Autonomy, Diversity, Society, which will hopefully help when we're thinking about creating tools for mass collaboration. And the focus is on creating a balance between the personal autonomy of the people doing the work and diversity of solutions, but allowing the participation of the whole society. So how many people here have heard of a technological singularity? Everybody? A technological singularity is something IT people and science fiction writers love to talk about. The idea is that we will reach a point, or we've already reached a point, where technology will become so advanced, it will be beyond the scope of human understanding, and artificial intelligence will be just programming itself in a Skynet sort of world. It's funny, because this has been a really popular idea for years, but not many people seem to have noticed or acknowledged that we've instead reached a completely different type of singularity, which is a societal singularity. We've reached a point where no one person can understand every aspect of society that affects them. And if you think back in history, a craftsperson could understand everything there was to know about their craft, or people could know everything that happened in the public life of their own village. But this just isn't true anymore. And even our own villages and neighborhoods no longer have autonomy. We're all connected at some level or other with every other village and neighborhood in the entire world, even uncontacted tribes. So we have to rely on collaboration. We have to put our faith in other people and believe in what they tell us and trust in their skill to create components, not just to create a product, but even just to understand the news. And as programmers, we've been used to working in this way always. We've always had to incorporate other people's code into ours and their bugs. But this has spread to every aspect of society now. And this is the biggest challenge facing us when we're creating tools for democracy, is we can't have simple direct democracy and self-governance anymore, because none of us can understand every aspect of everything that affects us. So there are two main areas to talk about, which are idea-based collaboration and action-based collaboration. And the focus is on the idea, the challenge in a societal singularity is how to allow all people to communicate but still be able to filter signal from noise, and how to allow everybody their democratic choice but still retain worker autonomy. So let's look at action-based collaboration. Excuse me. The action-based model that has become almost ubiquitous in corporate collaboration is this competitive hierarchical model, and most of us are all too familiar with this. The typical response to any situation which requires an action is to create a noun in the form of an official organization or government body or an official person, and then the focus remains on the personalities and the organization instead of the action itself. And a new idea in a personality-based system, this hierarchy creates what I call a personality-based system as opposed to an idea or action-based system, because a new idea in a personality-based system remains bound to the originator until it's legally transferred to another owner. So all ideas come from the owner, and all the direction and approval comes from people at each level of this. There are bottlenecks everywhere, and most people don't enjoy working in this kind of system because they lose autonomy and mastery and control over their own work, and there's very little diversity at the top, so all the ideas and talent downstream are lost. And because this is a closed system, collaboration doesn't happen between people unless they happen to be hired by the same project. So with this model, we have no society, no autonomy, and no diversity. And the traditional alternative has been a cooperative system. And cooperatives attempt to replace this hierarchical model with a consensus-driven system to allow some diversity at the top. But this is only most effective in groups of 2 to 8 people. When you get groups over 75, communication becomes very difficult. It's very difficult to get anything done because this is still a personality-based system. So to initiate an idea, you have to have approval of the entire group, both at the initiation and every step along the way. And all your resources in communication in a cooperative system are spent on communication or persuasion, and the entire thing can be derailed by a power struggle. And this can be really dominated by extroverted personalities who try to control the work of others and are very justly resented by those doing the work. And the consensus or cooperatives typically use voting or consensus to reach agreement for the entire group, and this may not produce the best solutions because, particularly in large groups, those who aren't actually doing the work may not have the knowledge necessary to make the best choices, and they may demand work that they would never be willing to do themselves. So the feeling of the worker on the bottom is no different whether they have the hierarchy we saw earlier or this consensus-based hierarchy. They still have no autonomy or control over their own work. So in this system, we have society within the cooperative, but not outside of it. And we still have no diversity because of the need to reach consensus around one product, and we have no autonomy. So this is not to say in any way that consensus or cooperatives are bad, because they're actually the most comfortable way we have of working in small groups where we share a goal and the personalities are compatible. But they don't scale. As soon as we get into large groups with a multitude of different personalities and different working styles, communication is a nightmare, and it's very difficult to get anything done. So the action-based method of collaboration I use for mass movements is called stigmergy. And I didn't make up this awful word, by the way. It's lifted from biology, where it refers to indirect methods of collaboration and communication among ants and termites and various other creatures. In human movements, this allows us to have autonomy for the workers, diversity of solutions, and still retain control with the entire society. So a system is stigmergic if it follows one clear goal, it is completely transparent, it's open to everyone to participate, at least within the user group, and the output is free for anyone to use or modify. So a stigmergic system puts control, it gives the worker back their autonomy. Nobody needs permission like they would in a competitive system or a consensus like they would in a cooperative to initiate a project. And once a project is initiated, there's no need to vote on it or reach consensus. If the project is interesting or necessary, it will attract interest. And the interest it attracts is from people actually willing to put in work to further the goal. And the people contributing, their opinions will have greater weight just on the basis of their contributions. So we don't have a direct hierarchy here, but the entire user group still retains control in their ability to accept or reject the work. So workers are free to create regardless of acceptance or rejection, because to leave drastically innovative ideas are never receive instant mainstream acceptance. So to leave innovation up to group consensus only would be to cripple innovation. And if we open everything up to contributions to everybody, the diversity will allow solutions that the originator probably never dreamed of. So where is stigmergy? That's stigmergy. We find stigmergy has always been with us in all of our social movements. You find it wherever a mass movement has achieved great success. Whenever you see a large group of people that have no formal method of communication and no formal organization, but they're all working together to one goal, this is stigmergy. So if you look at something like the civil rights movement in the United States, this is a multi-generational movement with so many people and so many different methods. But each group and each individual have decided for themselves how best to participate and how they wish to further this goal. So if this chart was for that movement, this giant group of people could be the Million Man March. This little square could be Malcolm X and his followers. The little heart could be MLK. And in the middle, all by themselves, is Ruby Bridges or Rosa Parks. None of these people had to formally communicate or reach consensus on anything, but they're all working towards the same goal, and they're all more or less aware of each other's activity. And the United States still hasn't reached that goal, so they go through these periods of periodic upheaval, followed by periods of calm working, depending on whether an event has triggered a lot of action, or something has blocked progress for a while. But a stigmergic movement will continue as long as the goal has not been met and people still believe in it. So this is the advantage of an idea-based system over a personality-based one, is you cannot kill an idea. And another example is freedom of information movement. And this would include everybody from the free software movement, Creative Commons and similar open copyright groups, Sci-Hub, which liberates scientific papers, file sharing sites, Wikipedia, the internet itself in its original inception could be considered a node under this stigmergic idea. And what keeps these movements from burning out, like we all did in the massive assemblies, is they're not spending all their energy on communication except in tiny groups, and they're following one clear goal. So it's not very often we find a group or an organization that's purely stigmergic, but Anonymous is one, which is why they always say they're not a group or an organization. They usually say they're an idea, but they're not one idea either. What they are is a method of collaboration, and the method is stigmergy. And this method allows them to participate in groups or individually with any idea they choose with perfect autonomy. Anonymous never tries to reach consensus. Anonymous is not unanimous. And there's no organization that you can just order to do something either. Anonymous is also not your personal army. You have to just put out an idea and see who follows it. And it may seem difficult to understand how we can apply this to a more corporate environment, because corporate environments are typically all about official people and organizations. But it helps if we remember that it doesn't matter what the internal organization of each of these nodes is, provided they're all following the same goal and their output is free for anyone to use or modify. So I'm often asked if Wikipedia is a good example of stigmergy, and no, it is not. Wikipedia is a cooperative. Anybody can contribute to Wikipedia, but your work can be thrown out. You can be locked from the system. The project you're working on can be locked. There is a definite personality-based hierarchy. There's a need to reach consensus around one product. So there is no diversity of product. There's no autonomy. But Wikipedia is still a node under the idea of freedom of information because what they produce is free for us all to use and modify. So a corporate organization can follow the exact same goals. The key here is for the corporate-style organization to recognize what stigmergic idea they're a part of and follow the guidelines to contribute smoothly to that goal. So one place where stigmergy has really taken off is in the IT industry because free software has meant that so much of the output is free for anyone to use or modify. So if we look at a stigmergic goal like we need better web development tools, if we had left this up to Google and Google had been their corporate competitive selves, we would have had Angular and progress would have been Angular 2.0. And we do have Angular 2.0, but we also have Facebook's React and we have Ember and we have a multitude of other frameworks. And as long as the user group has not reached consensus over which tools we want, we will have a multitude of options available to us. And then when we start to reach consensus, like the majority of us are probably done making green and purple websites with black sparkles all over, and we're all going to create, the vast majority of us are going to create very uniform looking websites, and we start to reach consensus around something like Twitter's Bootstrap, and then something comes in like Google's Material Design, and we all start hacking away on that again. The same periods of upheaval and then calm working are apparent in corporate stigmergy as in social stigmergy. In this case, HTML5 and ES6 stimulated a rush in web development. But this, obviously, this example of corporate stigmergy leaves a lot to be desired. When you have players like Facebook and Google and Twitter, there are many issues like who gets paid. Obviously, Google employees get paid, free software programmers not so much. We can't possibly compete with their massive user groups and their massive development team budget. But just this one change of making the software, the output, free and open for everyone to use, this means that we can have consensus without having a monopoly, which is huge. It means it's starting to approach stigmergic organization, particularly in the communities surrounding these frameworks, like the people developing add-ons and packages for Angular and React and the rest of them. So it's not ideal, but it's approaching stigmergy, which is a lot better than we can say for science and academia, who are supposed to be stigmergic. The idea in science and academia is everybody is supposed to publish and everybody's supposed to build off of each other's findings. But because their work is not accessible and it's not open copyright, it's very frequently corporate IP property, and because they do not welcome or reward participation from the outside, they're very far from stigmergic, and their progress is not nearly what it ought to be. If we look back at these, the last 3 of the 4 points to be a stigmergic organization do not apply to science and academia. So they have a very long way to go before they're going to start acting as an epistemic community for us all. Which brings us to idea-based collaboration. So we've been talking about stigmergy, which is action-based collaboration which follows an idea. But what if we just want to collaborate on ideas themselves? What if we want to build a knowledge repository or find some verified information about something? If you look back again at the 2010-2011 movements, like M15 and Occupy and the rest of them, they were great at action-based stigmergy, particularly, action-based collaboration, particularly when they used stigmergy. But they really struggled with idea-based collaboration, like setting goals. And this is really important because without the idea, there is no action. Stigmergy follows ideas and information. Oh my, that says idea. It's off the screen, but it says idea on my computer. So management of ideas and information in stigmergic collaboration is as important as managing personalities in competitive or cooperative collaboration. If you think of this in a governance context, we won't be electing people, we'll be electing ideas. The single most important key I've found to whether or not people will participate in a mass action is whether or not they have conviction in the goal. And not whether the goal affects them, or whether it's easy to understand or easy to do, or even safe. I have created many actions where the audience was completely removed from the people affected, or it was very difficult, the action was dangerous, or it was very difficult to understand or even believe at first, and none of this mattered. The only thing that mattered is if they had conviction in the goals. And the easiest way to stop an action is to sow doubt in that goal. But having conviction in our goals, finding the information we need to have conviction in our goals, is really not easy. If we think of a large population creating knowledge repositories stigmergically, we have this picture of a bunch of ants sorting information and putting all the best in a pile somewhere. And that's probably what we thought we were going to do with Twitter, but it didn't work. And it didn't work because this is not how knowledge works in a singularity. So this is why a horizontal movement can't just do that, particularly not a really personality-dominated horizontal movement like Occupy, or any kind of direct democracy that starts from the premise of all voices being equal, because this goes back to what I said about a societal singularity. We don't all know everything about every aspect of society that affects us, and we can't, and we don't want to, because we may not have the time, we may not have the interest. So we have to stop berating voters for not spending all of their time studying about everything that affects them, because it's not possible for us all to know all this, and it's not fun. There's got to be a better solution than that. So I love this chart because it shows exactly why we need concentric circles in a democracy. This little chasm between the innovation of ideas and their acceptance by the wider public, this is where gatekeepers and demagogues lie in wait to control ideas before they reach the public, like little trolls under the bridge. And this is why we need knowledge bridges, because very few ideas can make it across this chasm on their own. So if we think about recent examples of elite working groups creating solutions to have them rejected by the wider public, like Brexit in the UK or the Colombia peace deal, it was because of a failure of the working groups to establish effective knowledge bridges between themselves and the public. The public did not see or trust that their concerns were being responded to. They did not see or understand or trust the decision-making process. UK voters said repeatedly that they were sick of being lied to by their experts in the media. So when the public loses trust in those who are supposed to be their experts, like their politicians, or those who are supposed to be their knowledge bridges, like their media, they will lose trust in any stigmergic goal these people present to them, and they will derail it, like I said earlier. And, sorry. This is also apparent in most elections that I've seen lately. There's just demagogues and hyperbole on both sides. There's no process of trying to reconcile the issues with the public or trying to create a knowledge repository full of verified information that the people can trust. And in fact, there seems to actually be more often an attempt to confuse and immobilize the public and just try and get them to vote against whoever they see as the member of the establishment that has lost the most trust. So the politicians are not presenting a solution that the people can believe in. They're trying to sow this distrust and get them to attack the member of establishment instead. And you may have seen an awful lot of people lately blaming this state of low information on social media, and they're partially correct, but corporate media certainly doesn't get a free pass either. Most of our tools for communication simulate direct democracy. So they look for the most popular information, the most retweets, and the most readers. But not only is the most popular information not the most innovative and not the most expert, the two are mutually exclusive. Popular information is riding the peak of this wave of socially acceptable opinion. So these are not new ideas by definition, and they are not ideas that can only be understood by those with an expert level of knowledge, also by definition. But this is why we have started to elect politicians on the basis of their tweets, and this is why we have politicians like Donald Trump who speaks at a grade 3 level. And the more easily understood and the less challenging your message is, the more widely it will be accepted by the largest group of people. So this is exactly what direct democracy and representative and liquid democracy do. So of course, this is what all of our tools for democracy have been doing as well. An age that amplifies the most easily understood information, as we do, will be an age of demagogues, as we are. But it's counterintuitive to think that popular ideas are what we need to bring us the best information and the best solutions. If we need an expert level of knowledge, like the kind that can explain Brexit or a peace deal or the issues that come up in an election, or if we want the people making the decisions to hear voices that are seldom heard, to widen their Overton window, to give them some fresh perspective, or if we want them to hear a rare case that may break their solution, amplifying the most popular ideas and information is the exact opposite of what we ought to be doing. So we have these tools that simulate direct democracy. We have tools that are very useful for finding out what the public's opinions are. We have tools that are very useful for coming to consensus. But we need to go to where opinions are formed. Opinions are formed based on information. And we need to create nuanced, detailed, diverse information that the public can trust before we form our opinions and long before we measure them. So, ideas need to be audited by those at a level of expertise that are qualified to understand them. But if we create a little thought bubble with a discussion group with only elite knowledge and experts and elite information in it, we run a great risk of having an elite oligarchy based on control of information, which is what we have now. So, in order to prevent an oligarchy, in order to have a balance between autonomy, diversity, and society, we need this thought bubble to remain a completely integrated part of the wider user group. So to prevent any kind of an oligarchy and keep this discussion group integrated with the wider user group, I use a structure I call concentric circles. And concentric circles relate to sound amplification. So the ideas and the people who are promoted by their peers to the center receive the greatest amplification, and their ideas are audited and spread to the wider public. And concentric circles are not hierarchical because they have no direct control over the actions of anyone else. An epistemic community is a knowledge resource only. And as in stigmergy, votes in concentric circles are very frequently replaced by actions. If this little drop of water doesn't receive any amplification, it's just an idea that'll go nowhere. And with knowledge bridges, you don't have to be an expert on every part of society that affects you. All you need is a transparent concentric circle that you can look at, you can get some feedback if necessary, and you can say, yes, this looks like an awful lot of people are discussing and an awful lot of people are auditing this. I trust that they know what they're doing, or not. If not, everyone can see the work of the experts in the center, either directly or through the auditing of the peer review. And the concentric circles can create experts as people gain information and expertise and reputation and are promoted to the center. Sorry. And so this happens increasingly as if a system loses trust, you'll find more and more people will gravitate to it to find out what's going on and gain more information, and there'll be more auditing and the system will become more healthy. But communication should not be the full responsibility of the experts in the center, which is where government initiatives like Brexit and the peace deal typically fail. Expertise should be carried by full transparency and user participation. And the epistemic community in the center should not be open to attacks from completely uninformed users and demagogues. The people who promoted them to the center should also educate and amplify their findings to the outer circles, and the concerns of the user community, where the user community finds those concerns valid, they will be amplified back to the epistemic community. So the epistemic community has a quiet place to work, which they need for their discussions at a greater than novice level, but it's a fluid and permeable process of acceptance instead of a binary vote after the fact. So if this type of thing sounds really familiar, it's because this is exactly how we do things in open source communities. In open source software, the code is free and open for anybody to read, and even if the end user can't read it, they can still read the reviews by other programmers who have read and audited the code. They can look at the bug reports. Any bugs that affect the community will be instantly broadcast to the whole community and amplified by the media, as we've seen many times. And the knowledge bridges will help, those with greater expertise will help those at a more novice level, and increasingly this is how people are learning to code. And developers can also read ideas from the discussion groups and maybe implement them if they find them interesting or valid. So an open source software project with discussion groups open to everyone is a perfect working example of a fully transparent, audited system of elite knowledge. The developers in the center make the decisions, but the right of review and acceptance or rejection belongs to the entire user group. And if the developers don't listen to their user group, then, and if another development team is willing, they can fork the project and modify the code to meet the requirements of the users, which means you can only be opposed by another completely transparent, fully audited, working solution. You can't just be attacked by demagogues and rhetoric. The user group will have 2 or more working solutions that are fully transparent with knowledge bridges, fully audited, to choose from, not just a binary vote for or against some expert solution with demagogues and rhetoric on both sides. So this forking brings us to this last most important part of concentric circles, which is the information is free for everyone to use and modify. So imagine if HTML and JavaScript were proprietary product that were not free for anyone to use, like Bill Gates wanted programming languages to be back in the day. We would not be talking about web development tools as a stigmergic system. They would be one proprietary product delivered by one corporation, probably Microsoft. The fact that we won this fight against Bill Gates and those like him back in the day is the single most important reason why IT industry has developed so far and so fast, and why it is the best place to look for corporate stigmergy. So imagine if we had this same freedom to use and modify the output from other industries, like pharmaceuticals, for instance, which Bill Gates is currently pushing oppressive IP laws for. Intellectual property in a stigmergic system is like an ant that finds food but refuses to leave any pheromones for anyone else to find it, or actually blocks the trail, which is such a ridiculous idea, I can't even think of a stigmergic example for it. Ownership of information is in complete opposition to stigmergy. which is to say it's in complete opposition to finding the best solution, to rapid progress, and to democracy. So what we've been looking for are methods of mass collaboration that will give us a balance between autonomy, diversity, and society. We want to allow full autonomy for the workers so that we can benefit from all of their ideas and talents. We want to allow as many diverse solutions as people are inspired to try for each problem. And then we want to allow the user group the ability to easily make an informed choice over which choice is best for them, as is their right in a democracy. And the methods we use are stigmergy, which we use for action-based collaboration, and concentric circles, which we use to audit, teach, and amplify information. And the best part about stigmergy and concentric circles is your work doesn't get wasted. It's easy, if you come to something like this, it's easy to feel like you're in a competition and your success or failure is tied up with the success or failure of the project you're working on or the working group around it. But even if you're organized completely differently, internally, if you follow the guidelines for stigmergic organization, then you will still be contributing to the same idea we're all working towards. So for the next 2 weeks, our idea is, let's build better tools for democracy, I think, right? Is that right? So if you follow these ideas, if everybody is free to contribute to your project and you to theirs, if you contribute to the epistemic community of ideas, if you act as a knowledge bridge to those trying to learn, and most of all, if your code is open and free, then you will still be contributing to the ecosystem around this stigmergic idea. So I'm not sure how long I have left, but hopefully there's lots of time for questions. Is there? Yes? Yay. So that can just stay up there. Does anybody have any questions, please? Questions. Thank you. Yes? Sorry.
Thank you very much, first of all. My question is regarding something I faced. I was involved with a long time before in Bogota, actually in Colombia, which is about the political practice of politicians taking advantage of ignorance of the people because they have, because the sources of information are non-validated. So it's very similar, but I guess in a way is opposed to what you're saying, but it flows with the same stream in a way, because they're happy because the voters do not need to ponder on anything they're saying because this is just as, I mean, poor people, poor voters, let's say a sector of population, they just need to, they cannot validate whether what this candidate or the media is saying because they don't have access to the top.
They don't have that kind of time either.
And no time, exactly. They have to survive.
Yes.
And there's no access to this center. So in that sense, the political process has been, feeding from the same. Bringing, this will be a great way to see how to break up with this practice. So, yeah, I just wanted to do something, to say that, and if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on this. I don't know, you have.
Sorry, can I have that again in one sentence? Elaborate on which? Which part of it? We agree.
Maybe we're agreeing.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you.
Okay.
Hi, thank you very much. I just wanted you to tell us what happens with when an idea comes together with a person. For example, you have WikiLeaks, which is attached to.
I knew I wasn't going to get out of here without that question.
I mean, sometimes it's easy to get to the people when you attach the idea to a person, and
so don't do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's opposite to the things that you're saying, but it's how, in a way, things works now, because it's easy to simplify your way of thoughts just by identifying yourself with someone else. So it's not only about idea. It's like, I wanted to be like this man or this woman, so I attach to their ideas. So it's really difficult. I understand your point of that if you follow a goal instead of a person, then it's less distortion. But sometimes it's far more easy to attach an idea to a person than sell the person.
Absolutely.
How are you going to break that, what I will say, animal tendency or genetical tendency to follow an idea attached to a person? How are you going to break that? How do you think that can be break? Thank you.
I don't know that it's our natural animal tendency, because if you look back, definitely it has been for thousands of years. But I think we took a wrong turn there way a long time ago. And I see stigmergy, people following ideas for as long as we've existed, millions of years. Like, we've always done this, mass migrations, all our evolution, development of anything like pottery, anything, it's all stigmergy. But this idea of following a person, it's the great man thing. And it comes more with when we started creating hierarchical structures. And if we create different types of structures that aren't based on hierarchy, it's very, very much a relearning process. Because not only have we been following these hierarchical structures since we started civilizations, but we've also been trapped in a sort of representative democracy thing for a very long time, which means, oh, who do we vote for to get this to happen? Always, right? So we have this sort of very lazy idea that we can just vote for a messiah and our world will be great. And there's many other things. I mean, the media, I blame the media an awful lot for creating these great man type of figures. And I blame myself and many others of us, especially those of us that came out of the movements of the last several years. We had this idea that we don't take credit. None of us take credit for our own work, because that's not how we do. We're all working together. And this is true of so many of the movements that I've worked with. But here's the thing I learned. Credit unclaimed does not disperse. If you do something and you leave it there, it doesn't disperse. Somebody will pick it up and use it for their own glorification. And then you have these demagogues that represent huge movements that very frequently they had this is another thing, very frequently they had very little to do with, because if we look back at that chart for ideas and acceptance, you know who's at the peak of that wave. It's not the people who are doing the innovation and the things at the beginning. Those aren't the people who receive mass acceptance, which is why we never have intelligent politicians either. Our politicians are just a little bit more intelligent than average. Because if they were more than that, there would be too much of a divide. So this whole idea of a great man, that maybe that worked way back when we had a family or a tribe and we had one person that was the greatest warrior or something. But we're beyond that. Like, in a societal singularity, the people where the ideas are coming from are not people who will achieve instant mainstream acceptance, because their ideas will not be understood. Did that answer that or avoid that question very well? You had a question, yes?
Hello.
Hi.
I found the ideas that you presented really fascinating. So thanks for that. But I have some kind of concerns around structure and context. Firstly, I mean, what if opinions aren't based on information? What about all the other kind of layers that form people's ideas in the first place? Kind of values, identity, political and historical context. And that leads on to my kind of thinking about the structure and context in which these stigmergic sort of mass movements have emerged. Because my understanding from kind of the research on populism is that sort of strong man thing kind of succeeds when there are moments, or at least a construction of crisis and alienation and mistrust. And it requires that kind of context in order for those leaders to succeed. So I wondered if you could say something about how relevant kind of broader context is to these stigmergic events.
Completely. There is actually, I was rather torn between what to talk about today, because there is another talk that might have been even more relevant, especially when I was listening to Pierre. I had a lot of opinions about a lot of what he had to say. And there is another talk online, if you want to look it up, if, YouTube, Heather Marsh, Get G. And it's about the problems that are facing us with our methods of communication online today, of which thought bubbles are definitely a very huge one. And this great man, Ponzi schemes of celebrity, is another one. And the one you were referring to first, it's kind of what I see with the one truth websites like Wikipedia, where there's one truth. Wikipedia will decide whether somebody is relevant, what is relevant about them, the whole everything, right? And then you have this one truth. And this is where we are not going to get anywhere until we redesign our software. Sorry, Pierre, we aren't. Because we need to go down past the software and collaborate in a way that allows a diversity of opinions, not one truth, in a way that gets rid of these celebrity Ponzi schemes where the only way you get famous is by getting famous people to retweet you, so they just reinforce each other all the way up. And the thought bubbles, which really, the thought bubbles are the most dangerous thing around right now. I mean, if people have all these theories about how Trump just got elected, and I have my own, to me, I mean, we've all seen the rise of fascism everywhere. I mean, Brazil has been going for years and years, so many places that these people are rising. But within the United States particularly, in the people I know who are currently supporting Trump, that I've known online for years, they come from the MRA movement, which is a movement that I have watched for years, which is, it's also called the manosphere. It's this group of people that the men's rights activists, that first of all they decided that men were being pushed down, then they decided, they turned into sort of white supremacy, and they all operated in a thought bubble. First of all, 4chan, then they went to certain Reddit groups, and now they're right on gab.ai right now. Twitter's kicked all the alt-right people off of Twitter, and they've just moved on to gab.ai, which is another thought bubble. We can't have this. This is like when you have people in a mass communication type environment like Twitter, they start to develop a sort of culture and accepted norms of behavior and accepted taboos, and ideas that are not accepted, that are shunned out of those forums, will create little thought bubbles. And because those thought bubbles aren't integrated, like I said, with this, we would have an elite oligarchy in this case, but in the case of these MRA activists turned white supremacist activists, they become like a little cancer in society, that they're like an autoimmune disease that you don't even realize is there, and it's growing and growing. And you don't realize it because you stay in your subreddit and they stay in theirs, right? So the technology we have now, it needs to be changed, and it needs to be changed from the roots, from the database level, which is why I'm working on a universal database and trust network to try and resolve some of that. But that's a very big conversation.
We should have that conversation at some point. I really appreciated the talk. I just wanted to poke at the information is free part, because I completely understand. I come from a long tradition of open source and free software, and I get that part of it. The part of information is free that movement that I am part of has, I think, failed to sort of capture is the issues around personal information and data, and also facts, right? So like code as information, I understand. But when we apply the logic of free software and open source to information broadly speaking, we end up sort of removing any value judgment, any authenticity, any validation. It's like there's no test suite for facts. Any sort of comments or reactions?
Well, this goes back to many conversations over the years in those movements like Occupy as well. Things that, there's sort of two aspects of what you're saying. One is the information that isn't exactly true that is free. What I meant by information is free, by the way, is things like code and scientific papers and things like that. We have absolutely no need for somebody's personal information. That does not affect our public life. It should not be in our governance at all. So the way I operate, why I say user groups instead of citizens or societies or anything like that, is because who is this relevant to? If it's only relevant to you, it's only your information, and it's nobody else's business. But if it's relevant to the entire society, then it's their information. And about the factual information, this is like something I used to argue when M15 was doing great, in my opinion, in 2011, but when it hit Occupy, when things hit the States, they have a habit of heading straight into the ditch really, really easily. And one of the ways, like there's this culture around people who control all the media where they think freedom of speech, freedom of the press is this ultimate virtue. And as anyone who lives in South America can tell you, that's freedom of the propaganda to prop up your demagogues, right? When it's freedom of the corporate foreign press. And I mean, like Globo, how many coups has Globo in Brazil tried to reinforce and prop up? So factual information, yes, and again, this is something that cannot happen inside a thought bubble. This is something that can only happen if we have collaboration at the data level. And the only way I can explain a solution to that is through explaining the universal database, which it's online. But yes, it's extremely important. AstroTurfing noise is a plague. It has been for years, but now finally everybody is realizing that it's a plague. And we can't exist on platforms that are overrun by false stories and AstroTurfing anymore, which is why we also need the trust network with this universal database so that you can filter out you don't have Google filtering your search or Facebook filtering your search. You filter it out yourself by your own connections. And that would be a thought bubble if you were on Twitter listening to their opinions. But if you're looking for fact-based information, like a more Wikipedia-style resource, if this isn't within 4 or 5 degrees of trust of you, it's definitely spam. Did that answer it all? Sure. Okay.
Aquí.
Hi.
Hello. I would like to give you an example about something that happens here in Spain after 15M and is related with a political party called Podemos. Mm-hmm. And there was a time when there was a structure that was called Circle, okay? Mm-hmm. And it was like the smallest piece of organization that people could create inside the party, but it was like an emerging way of creating it. There was no order to make it. There was no statutes in the party. So people start to create cycles in a free way, and it reminds me the stick merge method. Mm-hmm. Because well, it's not a method. It's like something that happens, like uncontrolled. And what happened is that everyone with interest in whatever, for example, people interested in economics create economic cycle, people interested in culture create the mm-hmm. culture cycle, but even smaller things like more concrete things, they create a cycle around that. Also mm-hmm. cycles around geographically related to a town, related to a city, or maybe more than one in different neighborhoods, mm-hmm. cycles in different neighborhoods. So we have like a rainbow of cycles of whatever. So it was like some cycles, they work fine and they get like, for example, many followers on social media because there were cycles like creating good contents. Mm-hmm. And it was like the philosophy also stick merge because they like, they work fine, so they go ahead, so I think it's the same idea. And other cycles, they were just like isolated and they were just like in the sea of cycles with no entity. Mm-hmm. But then the hierarchical structure came, and decide which are the certified cycles here. Mm-hmm. So we're going to create a method to certify cycles, and then all this magic related with the Steamergy ends up completely, and we had a structure of a classical party. So it was like what happened And what I'm wondering is how we could, how this, I don't mean we because I want to study like from outside, but how this organization, imagine that we have a new party and we have also the same dynamic, how we can like surf this wave of stigmergy to finally concrete a different structure that could be, for example, a political party, because finally a political party has to decide what things they're gonna go inside a program, no, for elections, for running to the elections. So we need to decide which circles finally are gonna set up this program, no? And so finally, there is the classical way to do it, that is the hierarchical way. We decide which circles are official circles, and the circles are the ones who can, for example, submit contents to a program. But this could be like classical way, and it's the only way I know. So I mean, I would like to imagine a different way to profit of all this stigmergy nature with abundance of creativity and etc. And finally could like use it to, for example, make an electoral program.
Well, one thing I have found is if you have the idea and the idea is perfect, people will do it in mass, in huge mass movements. So for me, the epistemic communities are more important, particularly for a government, for a political party. And what I would do is create a shadow cabinet of mock ministries. Like if you have a Ministry of Health, a Ministry of Education, a Ministry of everything in your government, you create those in the public, like a shadow cabinet for the public, where you promote your own experts who you think should be making the decisions for the health in your country, and you create your own epistemic community and your own concentric circle, and then you push the Ministry of Health, the real one, whoever's elected, whether it's you or somebody else, even if you have no MPs or no politicians elected, you still create these shadow ministries of who the people decided are the experts they want to listen to, these concentric circles. And if they aren't listened to, if the Ministry of Health goes ahead and does something different than the shadow ministry, then you have a political, it's like a lobby group, but we have, our lobby groups currently are owned by big corporations. But this would be like a grassroots thing that the people can actually trust, that they can say, this is how we ought to be doing our education. This is what we want from our Ministry of Education. And they all agree, and they promote the people that they see as most expert to further that goal. So for me, more than getting politicians elected, I'm more interested in pushing their direction, which means to create the shadow ministries instead, like an opposition party would. Does that make sense? No?
Yes, but I
Yes, but it's
think
not
maybe
recorded.
I'm asking for a
You're asking
very
for
difficult problem.
For Podemos?
No, I mean that I know that my question could be like maybe impossible to answer. I mean that like having you said, okay, I prefer not working in a party, but my question was related to how to work in a concrete organization with finally you have to make, like take some decisions because you have different views of how to do things. So finally you have to make a decision. Maybe these options come from stigmergy cycles, no?
But this is what
But finally you have to choose one. So how you finally do that?
It's who does it. It's the same as in software. What we say is the only thing that matters is working code. Who did it? You know, what do you have done? And that is what you go with, because it's obviously where the most interest and the most urgency is. It's what people are working on, right? You don't...
Okay, but imagine that finally there is just one part of the code that is going to be uploaded to the main tool that thousands of people are using on the internet. So finally, one version of the tool has to be modified and has to be one of the options. So finally, you have to choose one. So
what specifically are we talking about? Can you give me a specific example?
No, the example of the electoral program, for example, you have proposals coming from different stick-mergy cycles, okay? And you have to choose one of the options for an electoral program, and they have to be just one.
Well, it's it. We can choose, we can get, what most people do is they would put those all online and they would say vote. And I really don't like that, because I think those people voting probably maybe don't understand what the solutions, what's involved in them, or what's the best solution. They might be just clicking. And if nobody's willing to develop it, then you can vote all you want, and you can make it the top priority all you want, but it's still not going to happen unless you have the commitment that is in action, the action-based commitment that people are going to actually do this. It's like, you can tell people, you can say, okay, we have a proposal. We all want all the garbage picked up in the city. You can say that, and you can decree it, but unless you hire everybody to do it, how are you going to get it done? The only way you're going to get it done is if you convince people, and they will do it themselves. That's all you have to do, is just convince people of the goal. So for me, I think what you're asking is, which thing do we say has to be done now? And
I know you, well, I can think we can talk later.
okay.
Bueno, tengo una pregunta. Bueno, con todo esto que pasó en Colombia, el proceso de paz, y pues de todo lo que se viene hablando, más que todo es las decisiones desinformadas que se toman y
Just somebody translate? Okay, yes. This? Yes. Then it can be.
¿Listo? Con respecto a lo que, pues el proceso de paz que se dio en Colombia, y es cómo realmente la gente está informada.
¿No? Somebody can just tell me, yeah? Disculpa.
Cómo la gente está realmente informada de lo que, digamos, lo que estaba escrito. Porque yo le compartí a algunos ahorita, es cómo en Colombia realmente hubo desinformación. Las iglesias, por ejemplo, las iglesias cristianas le decían a la gente que si votaban que sí al acuerdo, si ellos llegaban a tener un hijo o una hija, tenían que esperar a que llegara a 10 años para que él decidiera si quería ser hombre o mujer. Porque con el tema del enfoque diferencial lo tomaron por ahí y lo que hicieron fue desinformar a muchos sectores diciendo que eso era lo que iba a pasar, y eso era una de las cosas que estaba sonando por todos lados, cuando eso nunca se habló en el acuerdo. También se hablaba mucho del castrochavismo que iba a invadir al país, cuando jamás estuvo el modelo económico en la discusión. Entonces, todo ese tipo de cosas hizo que ese proceso de paz pues le dijeran que no al acuerdo, porque en ese momento pues ya hay un nuevo acuerdo, que se hicieron ajustes y que realmente la gente a veces no entendía, porque hablaban de impunidad y después pues quienes decían que no salieron diciendo que querían alivio judicial para militares y paramilitares que ya hicieron un proceso de paz en el país. Entonces, digamos que en esa medida, ¿cómo se podría realmente informar con tanto medio de comunicación, haciendo mella y diciendo mentiras al país, que incluso pues algunos defensores de derechos humanos denunciaron esto por fraude al sufragante, pues que es un delito también en el país? Entonces, esa es como la pregunta.
Okay, I need help.
Okay. Maybe I can translate to everyone. Yeah.
Okay.
The question is regarding the peace process in Colombia. The peace process, the agreement happened in Colombia, and it's a difficult question. I don't know how related it is. But she says, okay, what happened there is that there were groups who grabbed the information, who grabbed the electorate with information. For example, one case she's quoting or mentioning is churches. Christian churches, they said things to people, saying if you vote this, if you vote that, about the perspective, gender perspective, and they at the end misinformed the people on where to vote, or guide the people where to vote yes or no. Right? It's clear that Christian churches told people to vote no for the agreement because they were no for that. Exactly. They were, and politicians, of course. And the other thing you're mentioning, ¿qué era lo otro? No, lo otro que mencionaste, además de las iglesias. Además de las iglesias mencionaste. Además de las iglesias. Sí. The other thing was there was an agreement, a 300 pages agreement, 287 pages. So the agreement, the pages were thrown to the people for a month to read. People didn't read that. So they relied on the media, they relied on the churches, they relied on information and misinformation, how to compete against that and try to get the truth. That's what you're asking, right? ¿Qué pregunta? Sí. I think we got it.
Well, there is so much misinformation besides just the churches and the ex-presidents and people like that that were leading the voters and scaring the voters, but there was many really factual lies. Let's use the old-fashioned term, lies. Like things like they were saying, these terrorists have such a great deal. Nobody has ever been such a pushover as our government. This is the first deal in South America where they did not get amnesty. Throughout North America, even up in Canada, the FLQ back in the day, who assassinated 2 MPs, they went to Cuba until their time for prosecution was out. They came back and they were elected MPs. You look in Brazil, you look in Uruguay, you look everywhere else where there's a military dictatorship, these people are back in power. There was no consequences. There was the amnesty deal, and Colombia was the first place that did not do that. And the people were told that they were such pushovers, they were the only place that let their terrorists off so easily. It was complete misinformation. And this is, again, back to the database. We need a place where all points of view are easily found. If you click on something like the Colombia peace deal, you would get up the Colombia peace deal, you would get up what the churches say about it, you would get up what the opposition says about it, you could get everybody, and you pick who you trust. They'll all come up under the same node of Colombia peace deal. All the information filtered by how much the people you know trust. So yes, that can be spammed by people who are more biased towards the church, but you'll still have it all in one place no matter what. It's not like Twitter where your whole stream can be spammed. It'll all be there, like Wikipedia, all the links for you to inform yourself. And all you have to do is remove from your trust network anybody who is trying to manipulate the public with lies. So it's easier than right now we have a situation where people who know that the demagogues were lying have no platform to say so. There's no equal platform. We can be drowned out on Twitter, we can be drowned out on Wikipedia, we can be drowned out everywhere. So we need a database of our own where one single node will say Colombia peace deal and you click on it and everybody's opinions are there, except the spam.
Can I? Yeah, can I make one last question?
Okay.
Yeah, it's not too related to what we were speaking about now, but it's a bit more related to the concept of stigmergy. As I understood, you were speaking of stigmergic goals.
Yes.
And you said it there, that it follows one idea or goal, and that was pretty clear, with, for example, with the civil rights movement, like you were saying. Mm-hmm. My question would be whether there are goals that cannot be stigmatized or processes that cannot be stigmatized. I don't really, I mean, if I try to think of the social movements 15M, for example, sometimes there's no really clear idea, or clear goal. What can you do when there's no clear goal? Is there no way to act upon it?
Well, what 15M actually did very, very well, which is why it now has political power, unlike Occupy, which tanked and has none. But what they did is they ended up dividing into working groups and giving people the autonomy of a concentric circle, exactly like I said. And the working groups would go back to the assemblies and explain what they were doing, right? So even there, they did have some sort of form of concentric circle. But what I find is, if an organization does not have a clear goal, it's easily co-opted. Back to that earlier question about that other organization. But if you look at something like the civil rights movement retained its clarity through all those cycles, because at every cycle they had a clear goal: end slavery, end segregation, end police violence. Yes? And if you look at another stigmergic mass movement, like feminism, this had clear goals once. It said votes for women, legal personhood for women. And then second wave feminism came along, and it became a noun instead of an action-based goal. And because it didn't have any firm goals, it was very easily co-opted to promote corporate product and to promote prominent personalities, typically from the United States, women who took it upon themselves to speak for every woman in the world on every topic, because there was no clear goal. And that, when feminism stopped becoming a stigmergic goal and became a noun, it became a personality-based organization, which is why it has all the division and infighting and personality conflicts that we see now, because personality-based organizations do that. They don't scale. So this is typical of them. So if you don't have a clear goal, you don't have a stigmergic movement. And whether that's a good or bad thing, there's competitive corporations that have achieved great success in their own minds with a completely different structure. In small groups, stigmergy is not comfortable. It's much more comfortable to work in a cooperative where you sit down and talk to people in a small group. So stigmergy, in my mind, is mostly just for mass movements or multi-generational movements or something where you don't have communication. So there's many situations like that where you don't have stigmergy, but for M15, when they didn't have a goal, or 15M, when they didn't have a goal, it was very difficult. And they ended up splitting into little neighborhoods and splitting into working groups. So I think for a mass movement like that, I think it is necessary to have a clear goal. If you don't want your organization co-opted by a great man or great woman in the case of feminism.
Ideas are easily co-opted. They're
Unless
easily
you're
turned
very
into
careful.
either ideology or dogmas, or turned into utopias, which is not a bad thing in itself, but then it wouldn't really be a goal.
And I find them harder to derail than personalities. And once you have a personality, everything about that personality can be attacked and all of their ideas thrown out the window and all of their work, yes? If you have an idea, they can say it was funded by Soros, but, you know, they will attack it. They will say, oh, it's just like this completely unrelated thing that somebody doesn't understand. But personally, I found more success if there is one clear, simple goal. Because it's usually just one action that, do you agree with this one action? You know, like, do you agree with votes for women? That's all you have to say. Do you agree with this one point, yes? So for me, it's easier to get things done rather than trying to reach consensus. But I'm not saying in any way that people should stop communicating. And communication is still obviously very necessary. Particularly when we're dealing with things like these thought bubbles, communication is more necessary than ever. I don't know. We have a huge amount of work ahead of us to reconcile what we've done to our societies with these thought bubbles online, really. We've never been more divided. So in that case, no, that's not a stigmergic job, that's a talking job. Does that answer?
I'm sorry to stop the conversation because, but we have two more questions. The last one maybe could be Okay, but we are going to make these 2 questions and we are going to close because after that we are going to go downstairs and have some light dinner, okay? And,
No,
okay.
my question is that maybe Islamic State will fit within Sturmergic. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, mine is also short. With respect to having a movement, even if you have a universal database that people can check, there's still the issue that generally people frame ideas and you frame information, so there's different frameworks. For example, in the Trump election, some voters may have been influenced by racist tendencies. And so their framework, they'll filter whatever information comes through that framework. The difficulty then about information then is how one influences things like frameworks. And when they're ingrained, it's very hard to move them, right? And so I think that one of the things that has to be taken into consideration aside from information is what one does about frameworks.
Yes, and a universal database and trust network does absolutely nothing to address frameworks. What it does is it's an attempt to smash the thought bubbles and the celebrity Ponzi schemes that give us these demagogues and the astroturfing that the state manipulation of our opinions from Facebook and everybody like that. I mean, I don't know what the experience of most people is like, but to me, if I go on Facebook and I have a few accounts with many diverse people on them, Facebook people are very, very uninformed. The more time they spend on that site, the more uninformed they are. And so the tools are a first problem. They're a first problem before anything, so that we can actually have information and we can actually communicate on the same level with everybody without the thought bubbles. Then we have to work on frameworks, which is a much bigger job. But at least we have an equal playing field and we're not being constantly manipulated by people who are trying to manipulate us, like politicians that are constantly painting each other as, and trying to make us fear and suspicious and everything else. Yes? So the answer is it doesn't address any of it, but it gives us the base framework to build on so that we can address it later. That was it. Any more? Okay, thank you.